The question of ideology has always been a pressing matter for Russians, and since the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict, it has resurfaced in the Kremlin once again. Russian authorities are trying to define the best ideological vector for the country. In this video, we will discuss what is Russia's ideology, does it exist at all, and what is its essence. First of all, we have to mention that Russian authorities usually don't disclose their own ideological views in any way. Moreover, according to Article 13 of the Constitution of Russia, no ideology can become dominant in order to guarantee ideological diversity. However, this is not the reason why Russian establishment doesn't promote any specific ideology. Constitutional rights are violated all the time. There's a more pragmatic reason behind it. Without a concrete ideology, the Russian government can shift its views from time to time, effectively maneuvering and staying as vague as possible. This helped them avoid consequences numerous times. Behind all these layers, there's something called Putinism. This term was coined in the West. It consists of several aspects, first one being the concept of Eurasianism, which is supported by people like Dugin. It is unknown whether he has any ideological influence on Putin, though some Western experts consider Dugin to be the president's main philosopher. Nevertheless, personally, Putin and the Russian establishment often turn to the ideas of Eurasianism. It is based on the idea that Russia does not belong to Europe in its purest form, but has its own unique civilizational concept. According to this concept, Russia is one of a kind, autonomous from other civilizations, and has its own path. The Kremlin quite often uses the term unique path to explain why Russia differs so much from the Western countries. However, it is not clear what is that unique Russian path exactly, since no one gave a definition, and it emerges in conversations with different contexts. Most of the time, this narrative is used to justify the government's failures or dubious ideas. This so-called unique path also gives rise to the opinion that Russians have a special place in world history. The idea partially has a chauvinistic and xenophobic connotation, and Putin has repeatedly relied on it, referring, for example, to Gumilov's ideas of passionarity. In February 2021, Putin said that Russia has not yet reached its highest historical peak, and linked this with the unique genetic code of Russian citizens. Some experts note that this statement sits dangerously close to fascism, since he claims that Russians are a unique nation based solely on its origin. Putin repeatedly brings up this topic, appealing to the vast Russian history. He paints an image of a great nation that is unique compared to all others in the whole world, almost doubling down on chauvinism. The term Russian world has also been actively used in Kremlin circles for the last 9 years. Similar to the unique path, it implies that Russia and the lands that historically were part of it are somehow special. Putin himself also likes to appeal to opinion of right-wing Russian figures, quoting such philosophers like Ivan Ilyin, for example. The next important component of Russia's ideology is traditional values. We have a separate video that goes into reasons why Putin is not a real conservative. You can check it out on the channel. In short, Russia's ideology has almost nothing to do with conservatism. Putin has been a president for more than 20 years, and all his conservative views are just rhetoric. He doesn't really adhere to the ideas being broadcast. Yet the rhetoric of traditional values still managed to appeal to a wide audience of citizens and even has supporters abroad. Putin supports orthodoxy, which over the years became completely subservient to the Kremlin. It is one of the most important institutions in Russia. At the same time, Putin is also nostalgic toward the Soviet Union, which is weird since religion was banned there. Family values and LGBT are among his favorite topics to discuss. He likes to claim that he's pushing against the wokeness and keeps repeating the myth that in the West parents are not called mom and dad anymore, rather parent number 1 and parent number 2. This conservative anti-LGBT narrative is widely supported, thus Kremlin uses it more and more in election campaigns and as a scare tactic. And it is so effective, even some right-wingers from the West see Putin as the last defender of traditional values. And that's something the Russian government really enjoys. The backbone of Russia's ideology is the idea that the West is its main enemy, which, according to Putin, throughout history has tried to divide Russia and take everything that's left. This is simply not true. Western countries were allied with Russia in world wars and tried helping it in other critical periods. However, authoritarianism is usually set up that way, through the creation of a common enemy. The Russian narrative is based on anti-Americanism, and along with it, Russia opposes all countries that are allied to the United States. This narrative is not recent, it has been adopted since the times of the Soviet Union. But back then, this enmity was justified. The countries had opposing ideologies of socialism and capitalism. Now Russia paints the West as its enemy by inertia, blaming all its troubles on it. Every liberal country is seen as an enemy, and strangely enough, the Russian authorities don't like the regime from the 90s that was between the collapse of the Soviet Union and Putin coming into power. They label it as liberal too, so people associate liberalism with various disasters that happened in those years. Somehow, Russia manages to combine contradictory ideas of imperialism and anti-colonialism. The latter was also supported in the Union. The Russian government constantly appeals to the former greatness of the country and to the fact that Russia is returning its ancestral lands. The current conflict in Ukraine is based on these imperialistic slogans. As we said before, Putin laments the collapse of both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. He is nostalgic to the times when Russia had more land and a larger influence on the world. The expansionist policy and armed conflicts go hand in hand in this post-Soviet narrative. At the same time, Russia is bringing up anti-colonial discourse, noting that some Western countries that used to have colonies are trying to get them back under their control. This talking point is crafted mostly for the Third World countries, with the purpose of convincing them to abandon Western capital and stop its influence. The same tactic was employed by the Soviet Union, but unlike Russia, the Union offered an ideological alternative to Western capitalism. The entire anti-colonial discourse is built around another favorite topic of the Russian government, the creation of a multipolar world, and some African and Asian countries are supporting Russia in this. Militarism has always been a part of Russia's modern ideology. Even before the conflict, the Russian authorities were actively boasting about Russia's army and its numerous successful interventions, like the campaign in Syria, for example. The development of advanced weaponry and nuclear weapons that could be used to destroy entire continents. The fact that the Soviet Union was victorious in World War II became the foundation of Russia's modern militarism. The victory parades held annually under Putin have become an important attribute of his rule. When every year a military parade is held in the central square of Moscow to demonstrate the capabilities of the Russian army. Military organizations for children are also created, which is typical for militarized societies. Since the beginning of the conflict, the emphasis on militarism has increased significantly, and military themes have become central to the image of modern Russia. Russia's economic vector is fairly balanced. On the one hand, the country has some clear signs of a free market economy. On the other hand, the economy is heavily regulated and the largest enterprises are controlled by the state. In his recent speech on the anniversary of the conflict, Putin paid quite a lot of attention to the economic bloc. As a lot of journalists noted, the speech was intended to placate all layers of the population at once. In it, Putin promised a lot of social guarantees for citizens, a raise to the minimum wage, payments for the military personnel, and so on. He also promised not to interfere in businesses. Credit where it's due, the Kremlin manages to juggle these issues quite effectively. The notion of patriotism became the central concept in Russian politics. The topic of patriotism is constantly brought up among Russian politicians, but the Kremlin's interpretation of patriotism is somewhat unusual. They see patriotism as an unconditional support of the government, no matter what. This narrative has become an essential component of Putin's regime, and it managed to sway those who were hesitant about the Ukrainian conflict. Some experts note that Moscow uses the realpolitik principle to pursue its own agenda. That is, it essentially rejects unambiguous ideology and professes pragmatism without principles or ideals. As we can see, modern Russia has no formal state ideology, only certain positions which are periodically changed or interpreted in different ways. However, a certain ideological outline does exist. It consists of Eurasianism and a concept of Russia as a separate civilization. It is based on militarism and traditional values, at least rhetorically. It has features of both rightist and leftist movements, but boils down to the usual principle of realpolitik. This video was made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Boosty, and YouTube. If you like our content, please consider supporting us.